the whole idea that of the revolution will not be televised, for example, or really about the core of all of these discussions is the consciousness behind them must shift. And we also don't realize that we are, and these institutions and these systems do a very good job obscuring their origin, and we are detached from understanding the origin story and the impetus behind a lot of these systems that again, whose consciousness we embody. And models in our society, they don't shift through mass compliance or performative rebellion. Not to say that protesting isn't important and things of that nature, but until we as humanity shift consciously and increase our awareness, not only with respect to our relationship within these systems and how they impact us, but also with our understanding of ourself in the in the universe. If we don't understand that we as human beings collectively must shift, must reprioritize, must look at our economy differently, our medical system differently, and nothing will change. This is where real revolution takes place. It's through human consciousness, and then that will ripple into the collective.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jummie Moses, spiritual seeker and metaphysical investigator exploring the mysteries of existence. On the show today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron Scott. For over 2 decades, Aaron built his life according to everything he was taught about success and fulfillment. He checked every box and climbed every ladder, crafting a life that looked perfect from the outside. But something at his core felt off. Eventually, something gave way. He chose to turn his back on the identity and value system he had been conditioned to accept. It was the only way he could stay true to himself. Aaron is the author of the new book, Before We Forget, The Guide to Personal and Collective Awakening, which is the current #1 bestseller on Amazon in transpersonal psychology and humanist philosophy. In this book, Aaron reveals the illusions that distort our perception and keep us asleep while offering a path back to alignment, integrity, and presence. Aaron is also the host of the podcast, the Evolved Podcast. Aaron, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you here.
So good to see you again, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Yes, our conversation the first time blew my mind. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Finding out that you released a new book, it was just perfect timing to have you back on the show. And here it is, guys, for anyone who's curious and watching on video right now. Before we get into the book, why you wrote it and everything, obviously in your intro, I talked about the fact that you had crafted a life that you thought would bring you fulfillment, but you quickly found out, or not quickly, but after a couple of decades, realized like that's not the path for you. So, what was that life? What path were you on that was misaligned?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people talk about the idea of programming and about the belief systems that they operate with. And I really believe that in many ways, as we all are, or even kind of like my vantage point with respect to those relationships, how I was viewing relatives, how I was viewing family and friends. And I just said to myself, what is going on here? I'm supposed to feel fulfilled. I'm supposed to feel satisfied and successful and all of these different things. And it wasn't like this, in truth, it wasn't really a peripheral kind of a understanding. It was really deep. It was really rooting at my core. And I, sort of elected to turn from that and look to see really on a deep, intricate level what was going on. What were the programs that we were adhering to? What was the operating system? What was the compass and the engine behind most people growing up in these systems? Most people going along the standard protocol. And really, in this book, I think you get a sense, but I really do my best to put an argument forward from a very practical, tangible vantage point to show people that the standard protocol, the standard program is not structured to fulfill you, is not structured to provide nourishment. And in truth, this idea of awakening, which is pushed to the fringe into the spiritual kind of realm, and people call it a spiritual psychosis. And in some cases, I think that's the case, but we'll get to that later. But I think as you saw in this book, I'm really trying to almost like put an argument forward to show people that this is not a fringe topic. And in fact, people that are gravitating towards this ideal, this kind of like spiritual awakening ideal, they are the ones who are actually, in truth, living in reality and are adhering to truth. And this was a big part of my book because I've always grown up in this practical, tangible reality, if you will. And I really wanted to put something forward that kind of said, look, by the way, the standard program just isn't what you think it is. So that was a lot, but yeah.
Everything you said is exactly why I really loved reading your book. And it was so quick and easy to get through because it was so interesting. And to your point about really making an argument and putting an argument forward as to the reality that we've been indoctrinated into is not the real reality of our existence. And I think you do a fantastic job about mapping out where we went wrong as a society, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I want to dive deeper into that. But before we do that, I want to go back to you a little bit, right? So, from my understanding, you worked in the financial sector. You were very successful in that industry, and now you're having these feelings about I feel unfulfilled. There's misalignment in my life, and this takes you down the path that you're currently on. Was it disorienting? And did you have to find courage in being able to step away or start to question what you were originally indoctrinated into and what you believed? Because, like you said at the beginning, you felt like people were haters if they had any sort of thing to say about the current systems that were in place.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it was more than just I wasn't satisfied, right? Like I went through a kind of real severing with my partner. I ended up having to shutter my fund. My life destroyed my marriage. But I was experiencing real things, right? This wasn't like oh, like I don't feel good because when I go on vacation, I don't feel great. My really like the core of my being, of my identity, of who I was destroyed, right? And I think, and again, I think that people in this space, I think this is, and it was a common thread where they're forced to peel back the layer and say, what's the deal here? Like, why am I not fitting into society, or why am I not being successful, or what, right? And so this was the fertile ground upon which I began this inquiry. But this was really a shocking kind of situation for me. And I had to like reassess and I really wanted to again figure out what the deal was. Like what were the mechanics behind my life? What were the mechanics and what were the common threads with my life and other people's lives? And again, this isn't just about a societal analysis, right? This is about bringing to light for people the embedded connection that they have not just with the societal systems that impacted me on economically or financially or socially, if you will, but really the underlying infrastructure of our society, things that we just accept and take for, or maybe don't necessarily even aren't even necessarily aware of their impact, right? This has a deep impact on all people, no matter their class, no matter their status, no matter their level of quote unquote success. I'm pretty sure I didn't answer your entire question. I
You
did my
did.
best to just fill it in.
No, you know,
Okay.
you did perfectly because I was
Okay.
trying to understand like with what really made you shift essentially. And it sounds like you had no choice but to shift because all these things were happening in your life and you were having all these experiences and you wanted to get to the root of what the misalignment was.
Yeah, and I allude to this in I think the opening of my book where I had a choice. I could say, look, I could jump back into the machine and I could play the part again and fall. I call it like living in distortion and living through illusions. And I could elect that path again. But I
Mhm.
said to myself, I'm better than this. There has to be another way. There has to be something else going on here. And I think that my background as well lent itself nicely to this book because I have always been deeply in tune and in touch with systems, understanding the kind of like the underlying ideology, value system of society. I studied philosophy for, I've been studying for my entire life. I was a philosophy and economic theory major in college. I have always been interested in systems and we, how we as, how we in society structure these systems and really what they're supposed to be doing and how they're actually operating. There's a massive disconnect there and people don't necessarily understand that.
Exactly. And I think, again, you did a brilliant job outlining that in your book. And for someone like me who I tend to see the big picture and I don't necessarily, and maybe I'm being too hard on myself, that I don't spend too much time with the details of what I'm picking up. But I feel like this book helps me to map out all of the things that like the gaps in knowledge that I'm missing that give evidence to what I believe in terms of the disconnect that we have or we're sensing as humanity. And going back to what I said earlier that I love that you did is taking us somewhat back in time to show us how we got here as a society. And you start off in the book talking about the fact that divine intelligence became gated, whether I think almost unintentionally, with the rise of religious institutions. And I would just love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, just quickly to respond to your first statement, I really
Mhm.
had a very a close sensitivity to exactly what you just said. I wanted to be able to present a lot of information, but do so in a accessible kind of fashion where people could digest it, get a good deep understanding, but not get into the minutia of a lot of these topics, which can be complex. But yeah, the my foundation really for the book, and I think you get that sense, is to really show the deeper idea of the divine, of the sacred, of source, and to make it less of an esoteric, abstract discussion. Again, this is probably a function of the practical part of me where I'm looking to like put my finger on something and show people again that these discussions are not meant or should not be the fringe, that these are part of that this idea that this divine nature, this sacred nature is part of our actual reality. And we have been cut off from that knowledge and cut off from that reality. And yeah, I think that this divine intelligence, if you will, is there for everyone to see. It's just that people aren't looking or people don't understand what that means. And a lot of the ancient mystery schools, a lot of the esoteric wisdom stuff you can read about through Hermetic philosophy, for example, this really, and it's showing itself today through the revelations in modern physics and other fields, neuroscience, what these truths, this fundamental nature of divine intelligence exists all around us. And it exists all around us through multiple planes, whether it's the natural world and then also into the metaphysical realm, right? There's obviously the understanding there's a law of correspondence as above, so below. But what is as above? What is as so below? And I talk about the divine order of our world. For example, first and foremost, that we operate in illusions. Everything's vibration. We're not material bodies. What does that mean? It means that we're all energy. And how does energy respond? I touch on that on a deeper level, but also things as simple as there are natural cycles and rhythms. The rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, we wake, we sleep. There is a embedded intelligence in nature, whether it's through our DNA mirroring other areas of nature, how certain components, why does a bubble take the form that it does? Why do bees form hexagonal shapes in honeycomb? So I take all of this information. The answer is that it's the fastest, most efficient path, right? So there is this efficiency to the divine order of things. And in addition to that, I focus specifically on the divine polar forces, right? Which were understood and known and which still exist today. And I talk about the interplay between these polar interdependent forces. And I explain that they are the sort of forces through which creation takes place, whether it's through a man and a woman, but also on deeper levels, whether it's through love and hate or fear and ambition. And I talk about how it's through the polarity only that things take place, and that being afraid and being ambitious, these aren't good and bad things, that they are integral to just the nature of the way the universe operates. And I talk about how this knowledge was first, what was really suppressed by the religious institutions. And it was done so in order for the religious institutions themselves to legitimize themselves and to gain power. And what became a really personal experience with the divine was severed from human consciousness. And we were forced to access this information. Actually, sorry, we were cut off from this information. Then we were forced to access this kind of like repurposed synthetic idea of God through these institutions. And I go into kind of what that did to our obviously our spiritual connection, but also how these religious institutions laid the blueprint and the bedrock for modern society, modern social systems, modern institutional structures, and these hold still to this day. And you'll hear things like, "Oh, religion, people aren't really religious anymore," but they're missing the point, right? The point is that these religious institutions solidified what we now use to guide ourselves through everything from the way corporate structure is, the way that we look at media, the way that we even look at ourselves. That's really like the bedrock that I set, and then I parlay that into taking kind of the reins back and reapplying this divine order and divine nature, showing how the world would be different and how we would be different with our own relationship with ourselves if we were to adhere to this divine program, because we are not in nature, we are nature experiencing itself, we're living beings. People, I know it sounds crazy, but like to even just say, but people don't realize that we're part of nature. This has been removed from consciousness.
Yeah, and I loved this section of the book because, to your point, you talk about how these religious institutions are the bedrock for a lot of the different current institutions that we see, one of them being capitalism, for example. But I just really loved how you said that with religious institutions, divinity was almost relegated to the external, right? Like we moved from this like enchanted world to a more disenchanted world. And I really love how you said that because of that as well, it pushed feminine energy and feminine insight to like the fringes as well, right? Like a lot of figures that were originally in spiritual texts or esoteric texts were either rebranded or completely taken out of religious scriptures. And I love that you gave an example across different religious traditions. So not just Christianity, but like Islam and Hinduism. I really enjoyed that as well because I tend to look through the lens of Christianity because that's the one I'm most familiar with. But it was cool to see how that happened across different religious traditions. And I want to read something in terms of like feminine energy and kind of finding balance and integrating that more into our life. And this was on page 37. And you say, without the feminine, we cannot rest into our bodies. We lose the sacred rhythms of life and that pulse through all of us. We cannot locate inner belonging and we mistake survival for living. Really loved that quote there because I think our society is really unbalanced. And when you talk about polarity and coherence, it sounds like in order for us to reintegrate ourselves with the divine, we have to and understand polarity and be able to hold two different quote unquote opposing forces because they technically do work together.
That's right. And they're not opposing in the sense that one would think. One is dependent upon the other. One doesn't even necessarily exist in many ways without the other. And it's about and look, nothing is perfect, right? And the balance that I'm talking about isn't a static balance, right? Because again, then there'd be no creation. But it's about a healthy kind of equilibrium where things aren't so skewed to one side and where you're sacrificing the entire other side, but where through, and we can look at this again. This isn't, although these are archetypal kind of forced discussions, we can look at them from a very practical standpoint, right? And the way that in how we look at our current society, where it's great to have ambition. It's great to do things that nourish you. This isn't about sleeping in a field somewhere for your entire life. It's important to pursue your goals and things of that nature. But if you're doing so and you're sacrificing or you're severing an entire part of yourself, it's not only is it not sustainable, but it ripples through your health, your mental health, your physical health, and then also it impacts the way that we structure business, where we don't care about how we make food. We don't care dumping artificial flavorings in there and that might cause autoimmune disease, or we don't care. We then try to pay off regulatory agencies so that we can make greater margin on our food. So it's a shift in consciousness where we are forced to, in many ways, or not even forced to, but we've been corralled to live our life so in this masculine tilt, and we sever ourselves from the feminine force. Where our life has no meaning. It's devoid of meaning. When everything's for sale, nothing's sacred. And this is something that people can kind of understand. And this isn't just about capitalism and consumerism. This is about the way that we treat our bodies, view ourselves, where everything becomes content. All social interaction is performance. Work life is performance because you're not doing what you like. You're doing something to get a paycheck, right? So this is an erosion of truth, of internal coherence, of internal alignment, and of meaning. And that's, I think, an important piece of it because It's pervasive and it touches on not only, again, society, but the individual as well.
100%. It's just so fascinating how much of our life is counterintuitive to our innate divine nature. And again, I think that's why you keep bringing up these things in the book is to make us realize that we are living in direct, and this might be extreme, but like in direct opposition to the actual balance of life. And you say the word coherence a lot. I know what that means, but I would love to hear your definition of it and how we can align more with coherence.
Yeah, coherence to me is alignment, is connection. And it's about, and we live in a fragmented reality. We fragment ourselves from truth. We operate through illusion and we fragment ourselves, right? I was just mentioning this where when your job is a means to an end, when there's no room to do something that truly satisfies somebody's ambition, when there's no room for that in an economy, right? What happens? You create robots. You create this kind of mechanized consciousness where you're getting up every day and going to work. This is a function of kind of necessity. But when your life is guided by the external, and this is a big part of it, right? Where we sever ourselves from the internal. We live from the outside in, not from the inside out. And this is a good link to what we mentioned before, where religious institutions, they fostered this, where we were connecting from the outside in. We didn't access anything internally. The connection to the divine, to the sacred, used to be a deeply personal, intuitive relationship. We were connected internally, not through external intermediaries, right? This whole idea of fragmentation, of a lack of coherence, is persistent in this age. And it's my thesis, as I think you can deduce, that this is what causes the trauma in our society. That it's not that even fields like psychology and psychiatry, while they're great in many ways as treating symptoms, we never really look at the pervasive nature of our modern world and what the factors are behind the scenes. And it's my belief that we've cut ourselves off or aren't in tune with or in touch with the literal divine intelligence, the divine order, the divine laws of our universe. They've been suppressed. And one would think that because we're living organisms existing in the natural world, this would be a crucial, important component to assessing if we're on the right path, not just for physical and mental health, but for, again, social systems and the way that our institutions operate and our relationship to all those things.
100%. And I think it goes back to the fact that we forget that we are a part of nature and we are essentially like a part of the natural world and we're not siloed off as these individuals. And I think that as human beings, we've developed this hubris of we're so smart, we're so intelligent, we're so focused on science that we believe that if we can't see things, like what you mentioned in your book, we have a very materialist worldview. If we can't see it, if we can't measure it, then it doesn't exist. It's a non-factor. And it makes me think about this idea of like secularization and capitalism. And in depth psychology, they talk about the fact that, especially Carl Jung, I believe, he talks about the fact that we have the numinous or the numina within us, right? And it needs to be expressed. And with the rise of secularization and capitalism, essentially, capitalism became the new God, which is what you talk about in your book, right? Where it's as human beings, we have, because we are spiritual beings having a human experience, as much as we try to ignore it, it's still a part of us and it has to express itself somehow. And capitalism has become the new God or the new mythos in our current society. And I just love to hear more of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We do long for meaning. We do, all of us. We can get away with pretending we don't for a long period of time. I certainly did, but it was toxic at the end of the day, right? I couldn't do it, right? But most people are either forced to or they've contorted themselves and they've distorted themselves to a point where they no longer crave it. I don't even think people a lot of times know where to look or where to even begin. These discussions become hard to reach, hard to grab hold of. And one of the most kind of pervasive examples of this, where economy takes advantage of it, is in consumerism, where people are constantly looking for meaning, but they're looking for meaning in all the wrong places, right? People think that accumulation is going to satisfy them. It's the biggest kind of scam. It's the biggest illusion because you can keep buying and buying. You can keep buying more clothes and buying more brands and looking for external recognition and all there are many different ways of expressing this. I talk about the trauma of excess. What it really represents is it's a deep psychological sort of schism, rift. And we look for meaning in all the wrong places. And we look for meaning in all the wrong places because we've been cut off from what true meaning is. But economy, capitalism does a great job of trying to fill, or not trying to, but giving us options to fill this void that will never nourish us, will never satisfy us. And we don't see it for what it is. And when we live our lives disconnected from meaning, disconnected from our true spirituality, disconnected from our true self. And I also, again, it creates, again, trauma, massive problems. And I try really hard in the book to, again, make this idea of our spiritual selves, of our soul, tangible, where it's not this idea that, oh, you're just this soul experiencing itself in this unique form, and that to talk about the soul, you have to go to this ethereal realm and go into abstraction and maybe go into the Palladian I try to make this very tangible so people understand how to look at what the soul is in truth, bring them back in touch with what that really is and how it manifests itself in our daily life. And we've been severed from this because, again, we've been conditioned to live from the outside in. And this book, a big undercurrent in this book is to try to reconnect people to their true self, to their true spirituality, the true soul, and to live then from the inside out. Because in doing so, this is where you take back your meaning. This is where you take back your purpose. This is where you take back your sovereignty and your autonomy. Because you're not dependent upon systems. You're not dependent upon externalities to fulfill you. These are superficial, misguided ideas. And again, economy does a great job. The markets do a great job of filling you with hollow, shallow remedies through consumption.
Absolutely. Wow, you said so many quotable things there. I love everything that you said. Speaking about us living from the external outwards, there's a part where you talk about the entertainment industry and media and how that kind of hijacks our attention and even the education system as well. And we're trained to seek validation, obviously externally, but also like our attention is also hijacked, and a lot of people are not fully aware of that. And I want to quote something else from you, page 53. I love this
Mm.
book, guys. You guys really need to get it. I feel like this is practical spirituality. It really makes things easy to understand and very
I'm trying,
easy.
thank you. I'm really trying to it's like I got your back. Hey guys, look, just so you know, like
Mm,
you're right. Like we're all right. And like everyone else is not that they're wrong, but like they're not understanding the real story here, or at least the whole story here. That's really
yes.
what I'm trying to do.
Yes. And I think you do that perfectly. And to what I was trying to bring up specifically about the media and how they hijack our attention. And I think the goal is to keep us thinking in a very polarized and not integrated way. And you say conflict, ridicule, and seduction are the currencies of attention. And attention is in this architecture is a commodity to be bought, sold, and mined. It thrives on reaction and repetition and rewards polarization over nuance. And I loved that quote, this section specifically, because I think that's what we're part of what we're buckling under is this society where like everything is sensationalized, right? And your attention is hijacked and you're told how to think and you can't really process things in nuance. And it drives me crazy. But I really wanted to highlight that and have you speak about that as well.
Yeah, I think that we can all understand, or at least let me back up a second. A big part of this book also for me is about bringing an evolution of consciousness across humanity. And I do this by showing illusion, or I do this by peeling back layers of things that people don't necessarily look at, or maybe even didn't think about looking at in certain ways. Not just to critique, but if you don't know the problem, you can't find the solution, right? It's one thing to just critique and then to just to complain about it, right? I try to guide, but the idea of an evolved consciousness in many ways is an evolved awareness. And really, what I say this in the book, what you give your attention to, you give your life to. And when you remember that, you become unprogrammable. And this is important because what we give our attention to is in many ways who we are, or at least how we experience the world. And we have media companies, whether they're movie production companies, television production companies, social media, that harvest attention, and it's a scientific process, and they know what cues will stimulate. They know, and we all know this. We all experience it when we're watching a movie and there's a big dramatic scene, and then the music comes in and you get goosebumps, right? So we feel it, but we don't. I don't think people know that it's calibrated. It's fine tuned, and it's done again to make you to push and pull you without you knowing it, and it feeds right into your unconsciousness. To me, again, it's not about removing media and even social media from your life. Media, and I say this in the book, media is beautiful. It's art. It's an expression, right? But it's about your relationship with it, how you are interacting with media, how you are interacting with the world around you, what your awareness is as you go about your daily life. And if you can see the cues and recognize them, well, you take back a part of you. Again, it's about living consciously. It's not about taking the fun out of things, but it's about understanding your relationship with the external world, with movies, with people, with your job, right? So this is all part of it's all part of the same ecosystem. And I try to, and in many ways as possible, without taking away from the the accessibility of the book, show across different kind of places how that looks.
Yes, and this is again, we're scratching the surface of a lot of what you talk about on the in the book. But yes, essentially, I think what you're talking about in this particular section is being awake in the system and being like understanding how we're trained to sleep within the system and just go with how we're being programmed. But if you understand what's happening to you, then you can buy out of the program consciously. And I think that's what
Right.
you were trying to express. And speaking about consciousness, something else you talk about in regards to consciousness and evolving is this idea of revolutions, right? Which I thought was so brilliant, where you talked about the fact that, yeah, throughout society, like we've made reforms, but we end up defaulting to the same paradigms of fear and control, right? And it's like, in order for us to have a proper revolution, we actually have to change on an individual conscious level and then like a collective conscious level in order for it to have impact. And there's a part where you say, you can't change the system without first changing individual and collective consciousness. And you say that this particular change will not be televised. And that's why people say the revolution will not be televised. And yeah, I wanted to talk about that because I thought that was very important. That was an important thing you highlighted.
Yeah, and it's funny because people like when I talk about this stuff, people don't want to hear that. They want to know what's like the tangible way. Like should don't doesn't happen with like economic reform and through like political. It's no, you're missing the point, right? The whole idea that of the revolution will not be televised, for example, or really about the core of all of these discussions is the consciousness behind them must shift. And we also don't realize that we are and these institutions and these systems do a very good job obscuring their origin, and we are detached from understanding the origin story and the impetus behind a lot of these systems that again whose consciousness we embody. And we models in our society, they don't shift through mass compliance or performative rebellion. Not to say that protesting isn't important and things of that nature, but until we as society, until we as humanity shift consciously and increase our awareness, not only with respect to our relationship within these systems and how they impact us, but also with our understanding of ourself in the in the universe. When we start taking back information, it's only through information and truth and information and knowledge that we can evolve. Because when this information is obscured or we're gate kept from it, and or it's pushed to the fringes or there's not enough time for it, these are all kind of mechanisms that prevent us from reaching higher levels of consciousness. And it's about making people realize that if we don't understand that we as human beings collectively must shift, must reprioritize, must look at our economy differently, our medical system differently, and nothing will change. We can, I think I say in the book, we can, um, to try to change things that the other way is to rearrange the seats, but the show stays the same, right? So we can we can say, oh, socialism is better than capitalism, or this is better than this, but it's all superficial. It's all peripheral because the soul, if you will, the awareness, the consciousness at the on a deep level never shifts. It's all just like this superficial, synthetic sort of rebalancing act, but nothing at the core changes. This is where real revolution takes place. It's through human consciousness, and then that will ripple into the collective.
100%. Because to your point, if that's not fixed or addressed, it just leads to continued distortion in society. And it's the same thing. It's dating the same person with different faces. That's what I kind of think about as an analogy. And
Yeah.
I have a friend who is very passionate about public policy. She's actually getting her master's in it and she works in it. And her and I always have this conversation about we're both passionate about the same thing, right? Like awakening humanity. And she's approaching it from what many would consider the more practical side of things, like public policy, etc. But I'm working on the internal. And I was telling her literally a week ago, I was like, the reason why it's important, the work I'm doing is important, and I hope it is that the people who will be the people creating new policy and pushing it out there need to have some sort of internal change and on a deep, profound spiritual and consciousness level in order for the change to actually take shape. So when I read that section of your book, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been trying to express. I think you do a much better job than I do expressing it, but I absolutely love that. And to your point, I think a lot of people want to break the system down, and that serves a purpose, not saying that it doesn't, but again, lasting change, the real revolution is silent. It's individual and collective, and it's internal. So I love that. And it makes me want to bring up what you talked about with regards to AI, right? Because AI is this thing that everybody's interested in, but also afraid of. And we're trying to understand, is it conscious? And you basically just said that AI, based on where we are right now as a society, is really just an extension of our fragmented selves. I'm gonna again one more quote because I loved this book so much. This is from page 65 for those who are listening and are curious. You say AI remains a mirror that doesn't reflect our evolution, but the apex of our disembodiment. What do you mean by that?
I mean that our entire understanding of human intelligence is flawed inherently, and it's flawed because we are operating and have been from this scientific materialist vantage point where everything is the physical world or everything is a physical object. The origin of things, of everything, even human consciousness, comes from a fixed form. The independent observer syndrome that I like to call it. All meaning can be measured, all meaning can be quantified, and this is what we view as intelligence. But in truth, when we equate, first of all, it's flawed because we're now seeing that the fundamental nature of reality itself is not fixed form. It's actually consciousness. The quantum, the quantum field shows us that we're operating on a deeper level here, and we are plugged into that field. Our consciousness is part of that probabilistic field, right? So right there, our understanding of intelligence, if you will, is flawed. We have to understand that we need to, before we start heralding AI as the evolution of human consciousness, we need to understand what human consciousness is. And we are removing an entire part of human consciousness, just as we do with everything else in this masculine, logic, measured reality. We're still suppressing the feminine. This is an old story that dates back to the religious orders, right? This is part of the fabric of our society, of our consciousness. And AI, people think again is this evolution, but it's really just a simulation. It's really just a representation of our misunderstanding of human intelligence. And human intelligence is pegged to emotion, is pegged to intuition, is pegged to creativity. Again, this should be obvious, but we're removed from that knowledge. We're removed from that understanding for many reasons. But this is a misnomer to think that artificial intelligence is the evolution of consciousness. And we have brilliant minds in the tech space, innovators who talk about the singularity where we're gonna merge with. We need to understand that maybe capitalists, maybe venture capitalists, maybe technology executives, maybe the military industrial complex, maybe they're not the best ones to usher in the next evolution of human consciousness. Why? I think it's quite obvious, but we need people who understand that humanity is operating on a deeper level. This, again, this is all part of the same, as I think hopefully your listeners can understand, this is all part of the same sort of misunderstanding, same disconnection from the whole story here.
Deep, deep, profound disconnection. And again, that's why I really enjoyed reading your book because I think it's accessible to people who are already thinking about this, but also people who are curious and they're not sure where to start, or they're not sure what they're feeling. They know that they're feeling some sort of disconnection. They know that the system is flawed deeply, but they don't know why it's as flawed as it is. And it's not just from a like a greed or policy standpoint, right? It's much, much deeper than that. It calls into question our consciousness as human beings and as individuals. And I think that's a perfect segue into talking about awakening, right? And which you touch on in the book. The book has four parts. And one of the parts is really talking about awakening and how it's not this like fairy tale, oh my gosh, I just woke up and I have all this knowledge and I feel good and I'm so connected to the divine. Why was it important for you to highlight the fact that awakening can be messy and it involves being stripped away from all that you know and reintegrating and rediscovering yourself?
Yeah, I think that awakening, as you just mentioned, is often viewed as, oh, this epiphany where I realize that the government is corrupt and that corporations are greedy and that what we were told is propaganda. That's like the first layer, but on a deeper level, what happens is you start questioning your identity. You start questioning who you've been taught to be. You start peeling the layers back, and you start realizing that a large part of your own individual identity is has been imposed upon you through indoctrination, has been imposed upon you through in many ways a program. And it's about what that program is. And one quick thing is before diving deeper, it's important to understand that people talk about the programming and the matrix, and but what people don't talk about all the time is that there are many programs, right? You can be on the entire other side of the program where like you are a fairy bouncing around between realms and you are channeling in spirits and they're talking to you about whatever it might be. This is another program, right? So I'm trying to talk about like the program that we've been indoctrinated in, that we've grown up in through like in the States and also other Western societies through like the Prussian model, where we're given the sort of performative identity. We're taught docility. We're taught that our value ought to come from a sort of utilitarian framework where everything that's worth anything is based on what you produce, right? So when you grow up in this society thinking that your identity is pegged to your money, the money that you have, the friends that you have, the amount of designer shoes that you have, where you live, your bank account. This manifests itself in many different ways, but the overriding theme is again, it's your identity takes the form of an external measure. And it's about bringing people back into who they truly are. It's not just about this identifying with the spiritual realm and spiritual awakening. Awakening happens on a deeply psychological level as well, because you are coming back in touch with the self, with who you truly are. And the reason that it can be extremely traumatic, but also empowering if you can hold it, is that you're forced to recognize that the scaffolding of your identity is not legit, is deeply distorted. And again, people live their lives not in touch with it, not in tune with it, because again, it's accepted as just the way it is. everyone else is doing it and everyone else identifies that way and everybody else looks at themselves that way. So it's like normal. But this is also a big part of this understanding of people sleepwalking through life because they're never put back in touch with who they are. This is what really operating in the quote unquote machine is about. Walking in kind of this like zombie like kind of zombie thing. You're detached from yourself. And awakening shatters this and it makes you question who you truly are without these things, right? Without this superficial identity, without this distorted sense of self. So it can be extremely disruptive. And awakening, and this is another a kind of a conscious effort on my part is to, for those people who aren't just trying to understand or get a foray into these topics, people who are actually going through it, to give them an anchor, something to hold on to so that they feel like they can find support somewhere and they can find safety, if you will, and they can keep pushing forward because most people when they awaken or most people when they come to these realizations, they don't have anything to hold on to. They don't have anything to grab onto. And it's in many ways it's very hard because most people aren't coming to these realizations. Most people aren't making these connections. Most people aren't evolving consciously. So you're left in this void. And I try to give people a place to find comfort and then tools to push forward, a confidence to push forward as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, absolutely. Because to your point, when people are experiencing that, what you just call the void, right, where you're having these realizations and you're waking up, it can feel very ungrounding. And I think that's why we cling to a lot of the systems that are already in place, whether it's capitalism, whether it's a religion, you name it. There's so many things that kind of give us some sort of grounding and tell us how to think. But when you're thrown out there where you have to rediscover who you are on a soul level, on a conscious level, it can feel very like ungrounding, like you said, just being in the void. And I think you're right. This book gives people language because I think language is important to understand what you're experiencing and how to keep going forward. And you also mentioned the fact that spiritual awakenings are not fast, they're not performative. It takes time. I remember the first time I felt so empty inside. It was like post college, 6 months after college. I have the degree. And I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to be happy now. Like I'm an engineer, quote unquote. And I've done the thing. And I just felt this like deep ache in my heart. I felt really empty. And now I have words for it. But back then, I feel like a book like this would have been very instrumental for me. So I kind of want to talk about spirituality as a commodity, right? Because you talked about in this world, things are extreme and things need to be put into balance a lot of times. And all because you're not for capitalism and for all these like religious institutions, but there's also an extreme side on the other end of spiritual exploration, right? And I'm not trying to diminish anyone's experience or what they're into because who am I to say that? But I do think it is possible to be spiritual without being grounded or bypassing the things that are important from a consciousness level and have your ego still drive your spiritual exploration. So I would just love to talk about that a little bit, spirituality as a commodity, because I think we're seeing the rise of that.
I think that when you go through the awakening process, first of all, it's hugely personal. I think this is important because I think that when you assign an objective tinge to it, you're missing the point. This isn't about being dogmatic. This isn't about digesting doctrine. This isn't about quoting scripture. This is about your deeply personal, unique experience. It's important to have guardrails to help guide you. But for someone to say, you must do this or it's about this, it's missing the point. Again, a big part of this is about, we'll get into this later, but people bypass a crucial part of this, which is they don't understand that their nervous system has to play a role into this, and they have to find grounding and anchoring in their in kind of a regulated nervous system. Because again, if you're completely dysregulated, if you're always afraid, if you're always living in fear, the awakening won't fully set in. And a lot of these spiritual bypassing kind of things that I see going on, it's detaching people from true, uniquely, deeply personal experience. People have to understand that this is, first of all, a process. The awakening process might take place and probably ought to take place for the rest of your life. right? This isn't like a 3 weeks went by, I'm good. This isn't what it's about. Excuse me. It's about, this is a journey. This is about evolving, and I'm still going on it. You're still going on it. And I'll have new experiences and I'll have new understanding and new relationships, and it will become part of who I am. Not all of who I am, but part of who I am. And what happens is a lot of people, when they're thrust into this void, they need something again to grab onto. And what happens is people allow their egos to back control, where they say, I'm an awakened one. This is now who I am. Again, it's another performance, it's another identity. And it doesn't allow people to fully cultivate and fully experience themselves because they're now adhering to another identity, another ego driven sort of construct. And it diminishes the process. And people are easily hijacked because they're the most vulnerable. And we have a wonderful economy that supplies the fix. We can download health. We can jump into and get caught in a lot of these performative, commodified spiritual packages where if you go on this retreat, then now you're spiritual. And if you meditate, first of all, meditation is crucial. I meditate every day, but it's more than that. It's not just about doing yoga and then putting on a headdress and channeling. This isn't really what it's about. This is like fun and it's cool to be a part of something, but this is another byproduct. This is what happens when you can't find that grounding in yourself. And it's because you bypass the entirety of who you are. I know I touched on it briefly, and the nervous system is such a crucial part of that because you need to fully see and be conscious of and be aware of yourself. And when you are not paying attention to and giving respect to all parts of yourself, whether it's your fear, whether it's your anger, whether it's your happiness, whether it's your whatever it might be, these are not things to suppress and bypass. These are things to use as tools to help you grow, right? Again, you can get really caught up into being corralled into these performative sort of spiritual pockets, and again, it's you're missing the point. This isn't about, look, and I do this intentionally. This is conscious, by the way. Like when I talk about this stuff, I'm wearing a baseball hat, like a golf shirt, and a sweater because this is not about a performance. It's about, again, living in reality, living conscious in reality and respecting our connection to ourselves and to the divine nature around us. Not about some distant realm where there's a God judging or about channeling Arcturians from a different star system. This is about, again, grounding yourself in actual reality. And I try to show that this should be something that this should be a topic and discussion that everybody is having or is looking to have, nothing to do with what you do or where you live or the job that you have. This is global. This is about the human experience living consciously, not through distortion and inversion and lies and illusion, but grounded in actual reality. Because again, we are a soul experiencing itself in the material world.
Absolutely. And I think, again, everything boils down to balance because I don't really, I haven't gotten into the channeling of the Pleiadians or anything like that. I do find it interesting. I listen to people who do that for research purposes. So when I'm having these conversations, and I do think that there is a space for that, but that can be the driving force of, in my humble opinion, in our humble opinions, I feel like that can't be the driving force for spiritual enlightenment because, like you said, it's deeply personal and there needs to be grounding there and there needs to be space to explore all the different shadow aspects of your existence. And I think in your book, in the front of it, it says, awaken within, arise together. And even though spirituality is it's a deeply individual process, I think as human beings, we're still wired for community. And I think we can have deeply spiritual and individual experiences, but as a collective as well. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight
Yeah,
that.
and I don't. Yeah, this isn't about again. This isn't about poo-pooing or diminishing anything. But these exercises, everything from channeling to, and again, by the way, just so I listen to frequencies, I use tuning forks. This is all. These are tools. This isn't everything, right? This isn't. This is about understanding that but that there are deeper levels here, and that this, and again, that these discussions are grounded in reality. They're not based on just an ethereal realm. This is a trap.
Absolutely. What would you say to people who are in terms of alignment, right? And doing things that they find joy in? What would you say to people who find joy in spiritual work and they've done the work on themselves, but they're trying to reconcile making a living doing the work and also genuinely helping others? Because again, obviously, there are people, really good spiritual practitioners that help people on their journey. And there are a lot of people who take advantage, right? And because of those people, there's this stigma against offering spiritual services for money. So I would love to just hear your thoughts on that and spirituality as a commodity.
I think that with everything, no matter what you do, you have to be operating from a place of integrity, from internal alignment, from truth. This is an important theme with everything, right? This is also in my book where I'm giving people not objective dogmatic truth, but facts, historical facts, showing my perspective, showing the connections, right? But it's rooted in actual truth, not obscured information, propaganda like most of us kind of experience, right? Or most of us, or all of us experience, especially with media, power structures, et cetera, right? When you are operating from inner alignment, internal coherence, and you're doing what you're doing to help other people genuinely, in my opinion, the labels don't matter. That's okay because if you're helping people connect and you're giving people real tools, not that aren't rooted in performance, but that you've done the if you're a practitioner and you're helping people, you're consulting people, you need to be on your game. But like you have people's lives in your hands. You're trying to help them, right? This isn't like a fun activity, right? So you need to know what's up. You need to do your homework. And until you do that and you feel confident at your soul, again, you'll know because we all know if we're operating from a place of sincerity and integrity. Until you get to that point, you shouldn't be doing it because then you're not actually helping anybody. Then you're just either doing it as a means to an end, or you're doing it to satisfy your ego, or you're doing it because you don't know what else to do. I will tell you that outside of that's obviously my perspective, but outside of that, I think you touched on something before where it's kind of like a lot of people are trying to help people, trying to operate in this realm in a consultative or in a therapeutic or in just a healing capacity. But even still, it's very hard because the market isn't there in many ways. There are more mainstream parts like yoga and meditation practices and retreats, things of that nature. And it's like my belief, if you believe at your core that this is the area that you want to go into, you want to be a healer, you want to be someone who helps people, you want to enhance people's consciousness, expand their awareness. You have to do whatever you have to do to get to that point where you can sustain yourself, right? If that means like plugging yourself back into the matrix and sacrificing yourself temporarily to get enough money to pursue your dreams, that's okay. That you're not selling your soul. You're doing what you have to do to honor your soul, to honor yourself. And you can't always get what you want right away. It just doesn't happen. Just like it's my core belief that if you want real sustained change to take place, if you want an actual real evolution of human consciousness, real revolution to take place, it will take place over time. It's through small steps. We all want to experience it while we're here and while we're alive. And in many ways, that helps people push and motivate, at least it does for me. But most likely to have real sustained change to really root itself, it's gonna be multi-generational. And it's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind where it's okay to temporarily sacrifice yourself, sell your soul, plug back into the matrix, or whatever nomenclature you want to use. As long as you're staying true to yourself, you don't lose yourself. Again, don't this is about not losing yourself, not losing your identity, not living externally from the outside in. As long as you have your foundation, a true foundation based on coherence, based on connection to who you are, it's all good. You should feel okay with doing that.
Yeah, because again, I love that you said that because I think that when we have these conversations, sometimes it feels like drop everything that you've known and chart a new path. No, it's about integrating what you're discovering about yourself and navigating the world from a conscious level, whatever that looks like. That doesn't mean you can't keep your 9 to 5 job or do the things that you need to do to survive because we're still living on this 3D planet. It's just finding the balance between your
Yes,
spirit and moving through this life. So I love that you brought
exactly.
that up. I should have, I guess, closing and winding down the conversation. I think it's important to ask, I think it's obvious, why you decide to write this book. Because I felt like when I was reading it, I could, and maybe I'm projecting, but it felt like there was like an urgency in getting this down on paper and getting it out there into the world.
I just think that again, I wrote this as like in a way like to prove or to add legitimacy to this whole idea of awakening and to push forth a coherent guide and manual anchored in again reality and practical in a practicality because I think that it's crucial for our actual evolution and for anything that would resemble a real revolution to be grounded in a book like this, to have a real kind of handbook and manual to use as your guide, because I see the potential here. I see what this could be, and this could be something real. But I feel like there's so much out there. There's so much information, but people say this in the book, we're flooded with information, we're starved for meaning. And I was having such a hard time finding like a group of like an essential foundational number of texts as like a guidepost, it's kind of like a beacon. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna take a step forward. I'm gonna do this because people need it. I needed it. And I think that if I can usher in a grounding, a coherent roadmap, I'm gonna do my best to do so.
And I think you did a great job. And I think it's important to end on this quote because one of my favorite quotes from the book. Please stop thinking you are small. The savior lies within you. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron, so much for joining me today. I always ask my guests, as because you've been on the show before, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently? Because, like we discussed, we're constantly shifting, we're constantly evolving.
I have actually. I don't think last time I said I did shift, but or maybe I did say I shifted. But I think that I will tell you that I had limiting beliefs with respect to this book and respect to what could happen afterwards. And as I started putting together like distant frameworks and like what things could be, what things might not be, I feel like if you're serious about being on this path and helping people and being marketable and operating in the real market, there are opportunities. Anybody who's so anyway, I have kind of some newfound optimism with respect to that. And also anybody who feels that, oh, they want to get into this area and help people, you can find a way, you can do it. So I want to add some optimism to those people as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm a big believer in when you're doing something from a place of integrity in your personal truth and personal purpose, I think the universe aligns to get you the resources that you need to continue to move forward. So thank you for sharing that. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, your podcast, or purchase your book?
Yeah, books on Amazon right now. It's actually going to be hitting It's gonna be hitting actual retail stores shortly, and there'll be an audiobook coming out in probably a month or so. So that's exciting. And I'm on my website, theaaronscott.com. I offer coaching, speaking gigs, and yeah, the Evolved podcast with Aaron Scott as well. If you want to dive deep into some of the inherited beliefs that we have been indoctrinated with and to try to rethink and reshape your understanding of yourself and your relationship to really the world around you, definitely check it out.
Awesome. I'm going to leave the link to your website in the show notes and the link to your book on Amazon as well. So thank you, Aaron, for stopping by shifting dimensions again. I have a feeling this will not be our last conversation either. So thank you.
I hope not. I hope not.